Shalom, welcome back to Bat Melech again. We would like to continue our series on redemption in the merit of the holy women of the generation of Egypt. Today we will be discussing Miriam the prophet, and it's interesting to see that Hashem himself testifies to Micha in Micha chapter 6 verse 4 that there were three leaders to the Jewish people in that generation, as Hashem told Micha, for I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, and I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam before you. We're accustomed to seeing Moshe as the leader, and he was in fact the prime leader, but these three were very interconnected. The Talmud teaches us that there were three gifts given to the Jewish people during their sojourn in the desert. The manna, was in the merit of Moshe Rabbeinu. The manna was a totally spiritual food. As a matter of fact, the blessing that they recited over it was that Hashem brings forth bread from the heavens, an amazing concept. And Moshe, being totally as highly spiritual as any human being in a body could be, was represented by the gift that was in his merit, which was the manna. Now, in Aaron's merit came the clouds of glory. Aaron was responsible, as Moshe was responsible for the law, Aaron was responsible for the atonement as represented by the priesthood. The service in the tabernacle and later in the Holy Beit HaMikdash, in the temple itself, was actually bringing the physical world to a spiritual rectification, and therefore Aaron was the merit. He was involved with the physical. In his merit, the physical was elevated. Now we have Miriam. Miriam, in her merit, was the Be'er, the Wellspring of Miriam. Be'er could be translated as spring or well. And this was in the merit of Miriam. As we all know, this Be'er, this spring, traveled in the desert miraculously with the sojourn of the people and gave them fresh water where they went. It's very interesting because water, on one hand, is man's most basic necessity. It is a very material thing. Man cannot live without water. On the other hand, water represents very elevated spiritual concepts. The Torah is compared to water. Purity is of water. And Miriam was actually the synthesis, just as Moses was the spiritual and Aaron the physical. Miriam represented the synthesis of these two elements, the spirit and the material, as represents the water of her Be'er. Now, Miriam's prime task was teaching the women, as we have said. This combination of Miriam, both spirit and physical, will become more clear to us as we continue to explore the character which was Miriam the prophet. She, from a young age, was tremendously courageous, with unshakable belief system that we saw with how she presented herself with a tremendous force of will. We saw it, how she confronted her father. Amram, and how she confronted also Pharaoh. And we said that amazing medrash which describes this little girl of 5, zakva chotama lefnei Paro, that she squared her shoulders and turned up her nose at Paro as she threatened him for going against the will of Hashem. Where does a little girl of 5 get this kind of courage, get this kind of faith, and crystal clear faith, not any faith? She gets it very clearly from her parents at such a small child. What other exposure did she have at the time? And it's very beautiful to see that when her parents waver, when her parents falter, she gives it back to them as she props up Amram with it. And it says, that she, besides all the disappointment and all the crazy things that were going on, she just knew that the Redeemer was going to be born. And when he was born, as it says in Exodus 2:2, that the mother, Yocheved, saw that he was good, and as Rashi says, the room filled up with light. It was very, very clear. This clarity that Miriam had prior to the birth became clear to everyone when this child was born. And the Medrash describes how Amram kissed Miriam on the head in praise of the fruition of this great prophecy that she had. And a short 3 months later, when this prophecy seemed to be turning to dust and everything seemed to be unraveling, and they were going to have to evict little Moshe in his baskets, Amram reprimanded her and said, "Where is your prophecy now?" And this was something that Miriam had to live with her whole life. And as we said, it says that she stood on the bank while she watched and waited for what would unravel with Moshe. It says in chapter 2, verse 4 of Exodus, that she, vayitzav, which is the word choice meaning firmly rooted. She was unshakable in her belief that somehow Hashem was going to continue this picture in a proper direction that would lead to the redemption, despite of what everyone said. And she was able to turn this deaf ear. She was able to turn this deaf ear actually for decades, when people in their bitterness, people in their pain, and were sarcastic as their workload became more complex and more painful. They would taunt Miriam and say, "Where is your great prophecy now?" And the famous answer that she gives them in Exodus 15:21, when she broke into song at the sea, it says, "Vata'an Miriam," and she answered, but there were no questions. This was her answer. Her answer was that the Redeemer did take the people out with all the miracles and all the beauty, and here at the sea, she was finally able to answer all the scoffers or the people that were weak from slavery that could not hear her prophecy. Now, Miriam's, as we said, her chief role was as teacher of the women, and she was a master teacher, and they were fabulous students, as pointed out already, how the tambourines were a essential priority for these women to take with them out of Egypt. But this was not all. These women lived and breathed the redemption throughout the sojourn in the desert. They did not take part in the sin of the golden calf. They did not contribute their jewelry as the men requested of them. And this is not, as some would cynically say, of course they didn't want to part with their jewels, because they did donate very, very generously when it came to the erection of the tabernacle. So the women took very great excitement in the erection of the tabernacle and anything they could contribute toward that. The women did not participate in the sin of the spies, and they, therefore, as some people are not familiar with this, were not doomed to die in the desert, and the women did go into the land of Egypt. Not only did they not participate in speaking against the land of Israel, but they fought and they stood up for their right to the land, as we see with the daughters of Tzlofchad, that asserted themselves so that they could fulfill their dream of the participation in settling the land of Israel. So we see Miriam as an amazing teacher who was able to give this over in such a powerful way to her students. Now, we like to look at names, and Miriam has a lot of names. Miriam's names are very, very varied, as we shall see. One name that is uncommon is Ephrat. We see this recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 2:19, and the oral tradition says that Ephrat is Miriam. Now, Ephrat, the two middle letters are the same root as Pri. because again the people of Israel multiplied very greatly in the merit of the Miriam, and this is the recognition of that name, Ephrat. Miriam's ancestor was King David, was a great-great-grandchild of Miriam, and as I said, David, the son of Ephrati, which again is alluding to Miriam, the prophet. Now, she had another name which is very unfamiliar, again recorded in Chronicles. P.S. People find Chronicles to be very boring. It's a list of names, basically, in the beginning at least. And there is so much to be studied in these names and so much Torah wisdom and insight there that we should not be fooled in thinking these are just lists and lists of names. So again, in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 8, there is a woman referred to as Achrachel. And if we take apart this word, this name, Acharchel, Achar means after and Chel began. She, Miriam, received this name after the splitting of the sea, when it was so clear that the women were going after her, following her lead. Now, Miriam does not only have flattering names, she has several very difficult names. One very harsh name that is brought down about her in Sota, in Tractate Sota 12, is Azuvah, which means the neglected one or the abandoned one. And of course this bears to mind the fact that during those decades in Egypt, she was quite abandoned, at least emotionally, by her people because of the message that she had, which seemed so far away and unpopular and ridiculous at the time. But more than that, she has names that give us yet more insights. We see once again in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 verse 5, there are two wives of Kalev that are mentioned, and as we said, she was one of the wives of Kalev. Now these two women in this verse in 1 Chronicles, one is Na'ara, which is Miriam, and one is Chil'ah, which means sickly or ugly, which is also Miriam. Now what is going on here? These are mentioned as two different wives, but oral tradition teaches us that these are both different names for Miriam. Chil'ah, sickly, ugly. The oral tradition teaches us that Miriam had a very disfiguring childhood illness which left terrible scar tissue all over her face. And she was very unpopular and alone, not only because she seemed to be way out there in her prophecy and almost ridiculous laughingstock, but also because her appearance was very frightening and unattractive, and she was not married and nobody wanted to have anything to do with her. And Kalev, who was much, much younger than her, married her because he saw who she really was. He saw the beauty and power of Miriam even way before others saw it. And when he married her, the oral tradition tells us that she healed, and she went from Chil'ah, the ugly one, the sickly one, to Na'ara, the youthful, beautiful one, again in the merit of someone else's belief in her. Now, her most popular name, Miriam, we might have mentioned already. Miriam, the root of which is Mar, which means bitter. Miriam was born at a time where the reality of the Jewish people was quite bitter indeed, and her parents reflected that pain in her name. But there is so much more insight than that in her name. If we change the vowels around in Miriam, we get Merim, to uplift, because we see that Miriam was absolutely tireless in her ability to fight complacency and was not passive, and she struggled to uplift her people, constantly fighting this injustice that was all around her, the pain that was all around her. And she actually succeeds tremendously, as we see now and we will continue to see, in inspiring her people. And she had so many contradictions in her names. She has on one hand this bitterness, this abandonment, this harshness, ugliness. On the other hand, we have this power, the prophecy, which again was Pua, which we discussed last time, the youthfulness, which is Na'ara, these unbelievable contradictions and contrasts, because Miriam was Merim. She uplifted herself. She taught through example that a person can be very, very low, yet rise to the most amazing heights. Now, last time we discussed that when Yocheved and Miriam defied Paro, they received gifts, and we gave one interpretation of what these gifts, these batim that are referred to in Exodus 1:21, mean, these houses. I would like to approach it from a slightly different angle today so that we have more insight yet into who Miriam was. Because as we know, the different interpretations are not one or the other. It's layer upon layer of understanding. According to one interpretation, the gift that Miriam received at that time was wisdom. And we know she was very wise. She was a prophet. She had to be very wise. And we know that she was the forebearer of the Davidic dynasty, and David was the wise king of all time. He wrote the Psalms, but there's something else there. I think the Torah might be guiding us to opening our vision of wisdom, and what special wisdom was contained by Miriam that she passed on to David, and even before to Bezalel, her grandson, who was the chief craftsman of the tabernacle. Now, we see something very, very interesting in Exodus 35:31 when referring to Bezalel, and you will see what I'm getting at here. It says as follows. Moses said to the children of Israel, "See, Hashem has proclaimed by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah." Hur was Miriam's son. Okay, and it says, "He filled him with godly spirit, with wisdom, insight, knowledge, with every craft, to weave, design, to work with gold, silver, copper, stone cutting, etc." So the wisdom here that the Torah seems to be referring to on one level with Bezalel is the wisdom of creativity, omanut, craftsmanship. And we see this very clearly, that Miriam was the same way when she went out dancing with her tambourine. And a very early midrash, a very beautiful and sweet midrash, we can almost picture it. We see when Aaron and Miriam together, Miriam taking Aaron by the hand to go out and dance before their mother and father when they remarried. Again, she was very much into the dance. David, the great psalmist, into the poetry. Bezalel, the craftsman of the tabernacle. What Miriam transmitted to her, not only her students, but her children that came after her, was this amazing ability to take the spirit, to take her spirituality, her relationship with Hashem, and translate it into creativity. I believe this in part is the wisdom that was her gift. The Tractate Avot tells us that there are 10 things that were created on the twilight time, Bein Hashmashot, that they, after the main frenzy of creative activity in the 6 days of creation, and before the resting of the Sabbath day was the twilight. There were 10 things created. And one of these 10 things, says the oral tradition, that were created at that time was the well of Miriam. This is a very, very deep thing, that Miriam as well, the redemptive process was almost part of the creation itself, stamped into those very, very earliest of times. And not only that, Miriam's well is part of the future redemption as well, because there is a very beautiful midrash in Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer which discusses how Miriam's well, which has been cited in many places, both technically and also, in a more more of a parable type of way to teach us different lessons. It says in Pirkei the Rebbe Eliezer that the wellspring of Miriam will bubble up from under the Temple Mount, will flow out into 12 rivers, healing all that comes in its path, empty into the Dead Sea, and sweeten the waters, and retrack back to Jerusalem. So we see that her well is not only part of the first redemption, but the final redemption as well. Now, as we said, the location, what happened to Miriam's well after the Jewish people entered the land of Israel? So the tradition has it that it bubbles forth for the righteous, and there are different things brought down about where it was sited. And there is one description that is very interesting in the tractate Shabbat 35, which says, you want to see Miriam's well? Well, stand on the top of Mount Carmel, look down into the sea, and you will see a sieve sitting in the sea. That is the well of Miriam. Now, there's many ways to understand this, and I don't even say that I could even partially understand this, but I would like to share with you a very beautiful idea that Rav Kook brings down for us. Now, he says like this: water is life, and that's why the Torah is compared to water, because it's the source of all our life. And the Torah wisdom, with the Torah which is wisdom, is also compared to water, because the ultimate in wisdom, Torah wisdom, which without it we cannot exist. So we see here the sea being the Torah, and Rav Kook says the sieve is the emotion. The sieve is the emotion. Now, intellect is static. It's stable. It's very dogged. It's very straight. It doesn't go up or down. The danger with this type of idea, just going with wisdom alone, even Torah wisdom alone, the danger is that it could be cold or lifeless. The idea of the sieve, which was the well of Miriam, which is the essence of Miriam, was the emotive, creative side. So Rav Kook says, what does it mean that the sieve is in the water? Because creativity is a very beautiful thing. Emotion is a very beautiful thing. It has its highs, its lows, its energy, its inspiration, but it's very affected by circumstance. And the danger with emotion alone or creativity alone is that it is very elusive. The idea being here that in order to pursue Hashem's design for us in building a relationship with Hashem, is the well of Miriam in the sea of Torah, the emotive, creative, bordered and protected within the sea, so that the Torah doesn't escape. A sieve drains everything through. A sieve in water, the water doesn't escape. And this is the essence of Miriam, says Rav Kook. Okay, now why Har Carmel? Why stand on the top of Mount Carmel? And this is interesting also because the first thing we think about on Mount Carmel is Elijah the prophet and his confrontation with the prophets of the Baal. He did not give them a sermon. He gave them a very emotive experience. He gave them a life experience. It was very colorful. It was very alive, because the idea is we have to know when. We have to know when it's the straightforward teaching and when it's experiential. And women are very good at that. And that's why Miriam was able to give so much to the generation of the desert. The very first woman, Chava, was called Chava, Em Kol Chai, the mother of all living things, because the term is Chavaya. It comes from Chavaya, which means experience. So part of who a woman is essentially, and part of her capacity and also her great need, is to experience and express and to personalize, to properly incorporate Hashem's will for her. And this is, again, the bubbling spring of Miriam. It's very interesting. Miriam HaNevi'ah, the prophet, the wisdom of her prophecy. But Miriam is also a bubbling spring that's Nova'at. They're spelled the same except for one letter with the ayin instead of the aleph, which means she bubbles up, which is the inspiration, the creativity, the emotion of Miriam, that she is able to therefore become such a dynamic leader because she synthesizes the two, and she is able to give over this yearning to her people to teach them that an intimate living relationship with Hashem is truly possible.
Bat Melech is produced by the Temple Institute in the Marty Morrell Studios in Jerusalem, Israel. Dedications can be made for upcoming Bat Melech teachings. To make a dedication, please visit templeinstitute.org, go to the multimedia section and click on Bat Melech, or you can email media@templeinstitute.org. Your dedications help to make these productions possible.